We are really honored and pleased to welcome you today to this publication book launch of the book on tech diplomacy. My colleague Pavlina Itelson and myself. I'm speaking from my office in Geneva. Pavlina is based in Washington, D.C. We are really honored and pleased to welcome you today to this publication book launch of the book on tech diplomacy. My colleague Pavlina Itelson and myself. I'm speaking from my office in Geneva. Pavlina is based in Washington, D.C. We are really honored and pleased. I can hear myself twice. Publication book launch of the book on tech diplomacy. My colleague Pavlina Itelson and myself. I'm speaking from my office in Geneva.
So hello everybody. I think Jovan does have some issues on the tech side. So in order not to waste time, let us start. So welcome everybody to our launch of the publications about tech diplomacy and about states and how they interact with the tech companies. Diplo started this work in 2017, mapping the San Francisco area, specifically diplomatic representations in San Francisco area at that time. And then we did another mapping in 2023, also again, the San Francisco Bay Area and what diplomatic representations they shapes, what the interactions they had with the tech companies present in the Bay Area in San Francisco. Looking at this, we have always looked at the diplomatic side. We have always analyzed how the ministries of foreign affairs or other ministries structure their engagement. And it felt very timely to look at the business side as well, to have the whole ecosystem in place, and to also look beyond San Francisco. We have Jovan back. Welcome back, Jovan.
No, Pavlina, just continue. Sometimes too much technology is not good because I had the LinkedIn channel open and I was getting some sort of sound back. But Pavlina started. It's great to address you all here. We will, over the next 1 hour, we'll try to maximize on the understanding what tech diplomacy is, what is interaction with the private companies, and this is our third report in the row, and we will be guided by, and I will be intervening with a few reflections on specific parts of the publication which you can access shortly. Pavlina, back to you.
Yes, so to emphasize Jovan's words, we do feel that this field is very dynamic, very new, and would love your interactions throughout. So if you have questions or comments or anything, please feel free to raise hand, put the chat in, and we'll be happy to discuss it. But I'll start with a couple of slides to get us into the topic. Let me open it up. And start the slideshow. Do you see it?
Not for time being.
Just a second. Hurry.
No, it's fine. We can see your screen.
All right. So let's start. As I said, in our previous mappings, we have looked at tech diplomacy from a perspective of diplomacy. We have looked at the interactions of governments with companies. And since then, since 2017, even from 2023, when we had about 60 or 70 interviews with diplomats and tech diplomacy representatives, we have seen a great shift in this topic. As I said, it's very dynamic. So on the side of governments, we have seen the interactions with companies moving to forefront. One of the reasons that we see this is a greater impact of tech companies on policy issues that governments deal with. I will say this many times through this presentation, the AI has opened the eyes and became a buzzword within the digital policy corridors. And the government also realized the need for new channels of communication with companies. They realized how profound a technological development can be to their development, to their workforce, to their economic stability and security. On the sides of companies, we have seen more regulation and compliance requirements and policies in place. So companies are interested to interact with governments about current and future compliance requirements, as well as solving global challenges, and we'll get to this, what that means for the companies, and how the responsible innovation should look like. In terms of environment we're operating in, there are also major geopolitical shifts we're dealing with. So the existing conflicts, and technological advancements. 2 years ago, no one would have ever spoke about neuro technology or AI impact on software and malware development and such topics. So we have seen the shift in the topics. So, and that creates a necessity and a pressure for both governments and companies to talk to each other. Now, in this report, we have looked at what is tech diplomacy, and Jovan will explain on that. It's one of his favorite topics. What do we see as tech diplomacy? Because there is a terminological confusion both in communications, in PR, as well as in the foreign digital policies. We have also looked at why is tech diplomacy relevant currently. We'll try to cut through the hype and see what terms are used in terms of digital, economic, science, and tech diplomacy, and what countries use what. Who are the tech diplomacy actors? So unlike in regular diplomatic exchanges, it's not government to government, but we see it as a government to a company or business sector in general. We have also looked at what instruments and interaction methods are between the governments and companies. These interactions how they happen and where they happen. So we looked at tech diplomacy hubs beyond San Francisco. Now in terms of definition of tech diplomacy, I have mentioned the actors. So we're dealing on one side with governments, on the other side with business sector, which also means that we're dealing with a cross-stakeholder blending. Two ways of interaction, blending two different cultures that need to interact with each other, different expectations on each side, and different motivations, of course. In terms of topics, there are a lot of digital policy topics and technical diplomacy topics on the agenda, as well as geopolitical impacts and issues for the governments and for the companies as well. In terms of framing these interactions, we have looked at the intersectionality and interdependence between the companies and the governments. So in terms of
maybe Pavlina, on this point,
go for it.
just as you said, it's my favorite topic. There is a huge terminological confusion in this tech, digital, online, cyber, whatever. We found 24 different terms, including Twitter, Facebook, diplomacy. And the real problem is, for those of you who are involved in diplomatic science, is that, let's say, till so-called Arab Spring 2011, diplomacy was a part of international relations studies and international law, but sort of orphan topic because it wasn't scientific enough for international relations studies, for calculation, for game theories and other things. There were side events. But then after the Arab Spring, it was basically, there was a big descent of communication studies people on the diplomacy field. For one simple reason, but because diplomacy is an exotic topic. Therefore, you had all sort of studies on Twitter diplomacy, communication, TikTok recently, to the point that the latest book, one of the latest publications on digital diplomacy, which has the name Digital Diplomacy, from Oxford University Press, has more than half articles dealing with communication, basically public diplomacy. Therefore, it was a major shift. While we have been trying to anchor study of diplomacy around changing geopolitical environment, new topics on diplomatic agenda that diplomats should discuss, and new tools. Within new tools, you have also public diplomacy, but you have negotiation, analysis, forecasting, and other issues. Now, personally, I gave up any discussion what is correct definition or not. I use term digital diplomacy as a more comprehensive and specific because it's based on digits 1 and 0. But we don't get into discussion what is the right term. What we insist in our discussion, and I invite everybody to do it, is when somebody uses term cyber diplomacy or tech diplomacy, to ask what he or she refers to. Does he refer to negotiation on digital issues on agenda or use of digital tools? Now, it is not anymore academic pedantry because US congressional report on the US cyber and digital diplomacy consider terminological confusion as one of the major problems for the digital diplomacy in making. I suggest that you read this report. It's an excellent a report from the US government accounting office. I forgot exact title. Now, when we studied tech diplomacy, it came with the way with Danish tech ambassadors appointed in 2017 in Silicon Valley. It was a part of linguistical shift to use of tech. You had big tech. You remember big tech was very favorable. You have techies. You had fintech. Suddenly tech became a topic like digital in 2010s or cyber at the beginning of the century. It is now contextual understanding, and this is why we, in our understanding this in this publication, and consider tech diplomacy as interaction between governments and private sector, in this intersection between digital diplomacy, economic diplomacy, investment, and science diplomacy. Now, mind you, we use the tech, for example, for tech attaches in Geneva. They don't have to do anything with the companies. They negotiate here at the UN. But at that time, tech was a popular term when we started tech attaché circle, and we use tech. But we always explain. We discuss with tech attaches interaction on digital issues in Geneva. Now, I insist on this because there is a huge confusion, and now US congressional report confirmed that it creates confusion. It creates confusion in European Union because you have cyber ambassador network and digital ambassador network, which makes sense because cyber, some sense, is closer to security, but those issues are so interlinked that I'm sure that the European External Action Service will have to reconcile these two networks into one very soon. Otherwise, it won't make sense in the future. All in all, when somebody uses tech cyber diplomacy or write the book or establish new department in the government, always ask what it is about. Term is very popular. You have many tech ambassador, digital ambassador, publication on digital diplomacy, but without conceptual clarity. And it's not academic issue, it's very, very practical issue that we know what we are talking about. Use of digital tools for social media or negotiating data and digital governance. That's I would say, critical point that can help us to bring some clarity. And we use this tech diplomacy title for our book in the contextual understanding of tech diplomacy as interaction between governments and private sector. Back to you, sir. Pavlina.
Thank you, Jovan. Now, just to add to that, we have also looked at current digital foreign policies and how these terms are used by different countries that have these policies. And of course, it's a mix. So if you look at Denmark, for example, which was the starting point for the tech diplomacy, if you actually look at the content, it's all cyber now. Brazil goes with science and tech diplomacy, others go with economic diplomacy. So it is, as Jovan said, very, very wise to, when you speak to someone, to actually clarify what is it that you're speaking about, because sometimes it might be completely different. So the next slide, we have also what we looked at is interplay between digitalization and diplomacy. So there are three areas, and that is the impact on digital impact on geopolitics and diplomacy. So how does digital impact sovereignty, interdependence, and power distribution? Specifically, two topics that are of importance are in this context are submarine cables and semiconductors. There's a lot of discussions about these two technologies. Then we have looked at digital policy topics on the diplomatic agenda, what is being discussed. And depending on the company you're discussing it with, it can be anything from privacy and data protection and data flows, which is very often the base for the business models of the tech companies, to economy and trade and antitrust and competition, to content moderation, digital taxation, and such. Content moderation has been very high on the agenda, of course, in 2024, especially in relation to the elections in the 64 countries in the EU that we have. So there is a whole sub-discussion on that one, and initiatives within the companies and governments to tackle content moderation issues. And then we looked at digital tools for diplomatic activities. How do digital tools make diplomats' life easier? So in negotiations, in representations, and reporting. As you know, Diplo has very vast AI reporting from UNGA, from other forums that we implement, and that was actually mentioned at the UNGA, and that we know that diplomats use in their own reporting and make their life easier. Also, the digital tools for policy analysis and public diplomacy. This is a big area. Specifically in public diplomacy, 3 countries, US, France, and Germany, are implementing AI now for public diplomacy purposes, and that is their own proprietary AI for the government, and specifically for Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And what can you do with digital tools for crisis management? So either goes back to the content moderation or other areas, especially in the humanitarian sphere. And then we have looked at how businesses and digital policy interact. And there are 4 distinct areas we have identified. The first one is regulations that have direct impact on business models. That is antitrust and competition regulations, especially for multinational companies, and data regulation. As I said, data is very often the base for the business models of big tech companies. So the data regulation would be the one which mostly affects their business models and their bottom line. The next one is indirect impact on business. So those regulations or policies that impact labor, talent acquisition, investments in different countries, consumer protection, have indirect impact on businesses. An example is, of course, investments of US companies in the EU. While it sounds very easy, you're actually dealing with a lot of national level regulations. So US companies do have a high threshold of entering the EU investment market and setting up shop in the EU because of this fractioned regulatory landscape on national level. Then we have international impact, and those are international agreements and treaties. The recent example is Cybercrime Treaty, of course, where businesses have had a big say and commented on it in the process. And these treaties and international agreements also have impact on how business is done, whether it is the cybercrime, as I mentioned, or cybersecurity negotiations and norms and rules in cyberspace. The companies are part of the ecosystem which implements these regulations, so that it has impact on them as well. And then we have societal impact, which is a little softer, I would say, in terms of impact definition. However, companies put forward good business practices, environmental, social, and governance rules, and these have societal impact. One of the areas which is up and coming and being a concern is actually that the business companies not only impact the policy processes, but because of their access to data and the ability to analyze data, they actually define the problems which would need to be addressed through policy processes. So, and then, of course, if the companies have too much of a societal impact in a negative way, then we go back to the direct impact on business through regulation.
Paulina, on this
now, yes.
Maybe just one important point for those of you, and I can see friends like John Hammery and others from diplomatic studies, and Yolanda, we are also analyzing how businesses are framing the agenda, not only negotiating, and they cannot negotiate, they don't, but what Paulina said, they're framing agenda through those evidence-based approach, data-driven approach. And as we know, statistics could be easily twisted in one and the other direction. Therefore, there is an important impact on the agenda and discourse shaping on the global level by big companies, which we saw in 2023 with the companies pushing for strict regulation of AI, which we can discuss in more details, and basically that AI will destroy humanity. It's softened in the meantime, but there was a clear business interest behind it, and that shaping made, for example, US public from almost nobody, well, except community which is involved in it, knowing anything about AI in November 2022, in less than 6 months, according to the Gallup research, 60% of interviewed people were for very strict regulation of AI and the view that AI will destroy humanity. Therefore, in 6 months, with the concentrated campaign, you had complete shaping of the agenda. And then there were a series of US Congress hearings, agreements, meeting in Bletchley Declaration, and these things, which address one important part of AI, which is long-term risks. But there are many other aspects. Therefore, that's I think, case study, definitely for master thesis or a PhD, how the big companies shape the agenda and push the governments to act in a way which was not probably optimal for governments. Now, there is a wake-up call in many countries in US Congress and saying basically, okay, we will regulate what will happen in long term, but we need to regulate what's happening now with jobs, data, consumer protection, data protection, knowledge protection. Therefore, it's an interesting power of the companies in shaping the agenda. Over to you, Paulina.
Yes, in case you're interested in the AI discussion and the impacts and how companies interact, I would also, in the report we mentioned, the California regulation, which actually does not, unlike the EU AI regulation, does not regulate the risks, but actually regulates the AI models. And that is a very interesting reading on how the companies react to it and how they're trying to fight it. So. Yes, so in relevance and tech diplomacy, we looked at different areas where tech diplomacy negotiations are relevant. One is geopolitics. It becomes more and more obvious that the impact of tech diplomacy on geopolitics is coming to the forefront. We have at least 2 written policies, and that is AUKUS policy, for example, where there is a provision that the government will discuss with business companies that have technological knowledge and technological advancement in advance any kind of technology that can provide military advantage, and they will actually use that technology for their own military advantage. So there is discussion on acquiring emerging tech for military purposes. Then we have interdependence between companies and governments. We have spoken a little bit about the regulation. That is the right of any country to regulate within its borders. But the governments are also dependent on companies for many other reasons. That is for data that is used then to run the state itself, whether for security purposes, social taxes, anything. So it's a symbiotic relationship between the companies and governments. We have looked at power of companies, how they wield the power, either economic, societal, political power. We have touched upon a little bit of how companies are trying to shape the discourse within the regulatory and policy negotiations. And we looked at power of government and the difference between it. The power of government is, of course, derived from the elections. So when we're dealing with the government representative, you're dealing actually with a representative of the whole nation, unlike with the companies where the main power comes from basically being big and having a lot of money and having the bottom line. But the motivations on both sides are different. The power of companies and their motivations are coming from having the bottom line, having the income, and having the profit. And power of governments and regulatory power of governments and the interests of governments can stem from different areas, including the future of the country itself, its security, its education system, and such. Now, looking at the different companies,
Pavlina, maybe on this
different
point,
governments. Yes.
Just one comment from the latest developments. What's happened between Brazil and Elon Musk and Brazilian government? It's an interesting tension between one extremely powerful personality and owner of big company, Elon Musk, and Brazilian government. Basically, Brazilian government wanted X to be integrated into legal system. Brazilian legal system. Then Elon Musk argued that it is for the censorship purposes and the other things. But apart from the real dynamics, whether it is freedom of expression, freedom of speech, whatever it is, there is underlying question. Who runs the particular territory? Is it Brazilian government who has jurisdiction, who has the sovereignty, or Elon Musk and his company? Therefore, that's Yolanda and the other colleagues from our academic field should encourage their students and researchers to discuss that, because it's not anymore just academic topic. It's very concrete, happening just like in this case between Brazil and Elon Musk. Over to you.
Thank you, Jovan. I'm gonna speed up a little bit because we're kind of wasting, getting out of time a little bit. So what we looked at is how governments interact with businesses and which ministries are responsible for what. There is a table in the report that defines these interactions and suggests which ministries are talking to which parts of the companies. We have also, and it is important to understand that these are two different ecosystems that are trying to talk to each other. So very oftentimes the diplomats are confused to whom to talk to within the company, and the companies are confused to whom to talk to within the governments. So there is this discourse. And within the companies, we looked at the different parts of the company, departments, and only several ones have digital diplomacy departments, Microsoft being one of them. The others deal with digital diplomacy issue, tech diplomacy issues through a variety of other departments, anywhere from communications to legal and compliance. But we wanted to, with Jovan, to go into deeper on the business side of things. Jovan, if you could take over again.
Thanks, Pavlina. What we did, we chose 8 top companies, 5 US and 3 Chinese, and we look at true revenue. We indicated, we found whatever their policy priorities, and we look also to their source of income geographically. Like in case of Amazon, online stores are the main. Then US, they have 69.3% in the US, and they're probably not interested that much in diplomacy. They're interested in negotiating with strong lobbying in Washington, D.C. Meta relies 98% on advertising, basically data mining from Instagram, from Facebook and other things. They're very exposed to the question of data protection. And they're very exposed to Brussels, because Brussels is the leader in the data protection, and especially with GDPR. Therefore, their focus is completely different from Amazon. And we have then NVIDIA as a third example, which sells the hardware, sells GPU, graphical processing units, and do the graphics. They are basically quite solid when it comes to data. They're not exposed on data regulation, but they're exposed, for example, to Chinese regulation, because they export a lot to China. And the sanctions regimes of the US government affects them directly. But then if you see this chart of NVIDIA, you can see their CEO coming and telling governments, you have to have your own AI. By the way, I think governments should have their own AI, but his interest is very clear. He wants to send more hardware. Or Microsoft, which has servers all over the world. Obviously, Microsoft is interested to share the security cost of the cybersecurity, because they're the most exposed to attacks, much more than Facebook or Google. They want to have the governments stepping in with cybersecurity. It is the reason, for example, why they push strongly for Geneva Cyber Convention. And you can see Microsoft very active in cybersecurity negotiation in the UN. Therefore, when you look for the business model, you can see exactly why companies are pushing for some policies, and why they are present in some policy spaces. So Microsoft is also very much involved in cybercrime negotiation, because it is exposed to these things. Now, what we did in the study, we also checked what is geographical distribution of their revenues. And you can see that, for example, Chinese companies, which are at the bottom, are very much China-driven. 90% of income, Tencent, Alibaba, is generated in China. Huawei is 67.10%, and they're not that much present in international negotiation. They're present in interesting places. For example, Alibaba has been very much involved in WTO, but also in the Universal Postal Union, where they negotiate the regulation of the minimal cost for the custom purposes of the parcels, because they distribute goods worldwide through the postal system. And they are very much involved in the debt negotiation in Bern, because the Universal Postal Union is based in Bern. Therefore, through a type of income they make, whether it is data or hardware or cloud computing or subscription services, and geographical exposure of these companies, you get like X-ray. You can exactly see why they have strong presence in Brussels, like Google and Facebook, or Meta, Alphabet and Meta. Why they have a strong presence in the standardization bodies in Geneva, like Huawei, for example. Why Microsoft is present in cybersecurity negotiations. Why Apple, for example, is quite relaxed on the question of data, because they are doing very little data mining, but they're very concerned about China regulation, because they're reducing it dependence on China when it comes to regulation. Why Amazon is not involved at all in the global diplomacy, you cannot, well, they are involved here and there, but you cannot see them present. Therefore, through these two statistical elements, based on the annual report of the companies from 2023, you can basically see their interest for involvement and negotiation with the governments, including lobbying. And you come then to the few centers of negotiation, international one. National, it's Washington, D.C., definitely, Beijing for China, but then you have a Brussels as important place where data, AI, and other things are negotiating. European Union has a very weak AI and tech industry. It is in a way third world of digital world because it is basically more consumer, but it has very powerful and very rich market. Therefore, companies are investing in the lobbying and the power in Brussels. It was clear during EU AI Act. They were very heavily involved in it. For another reason, many countries, smaller countries, who do not have a power to negotiate with big companies, they're watching what will be outcome of the Brussels negotiations. This is so-called Brussels effect, which is now contested in theory, but it is what smaller countries are watching. It was clear with GDPR. It will be now with EU AI Act negotiation to see how countries will deal with Europe. And then countries, not even small countries, for example, Indonesia took quite a few things from GDPR. Then they will implement, and basically they will say, hey, we want the same treatment as you give to a European Union. That's an interesting for diplomacy dynamics.
Thank you. So going forward, in order to discuss these questions, we have looked at the instruments and how the interactions take place. Jovan already mentioned lobbying parts in Brussels, DC, and Geneva, or Beijing. Also through public policy and advocacy initiatives, public policy both on the side of governments and companies, corporate responsibility, and, for example, part of the tech diplomacy negotiations is actually adopting the regulations before they come into full force, like we see with the AI regulation currently within the EU. Public-private partnerships on both sides, so benefiting governments and businesses. Research and development, so countries do like to benefit from research and development that is conducted by the tech companies, as of course tech companies do have resources which are way beyond the governmental resources to dedicate to these questions. And consulting and advisory and negotiations. So we have seen it with a couple of negotiating processes, including the cybercrime process, that the companies are very involved, either in commenting on the upcoming legislation or putting their input forward in global internet governance fora. And then we have looked also at where these interactions are taking place. I'd like to circle back on what Jovan was saying about the companies. When we look at the map, there's clear indicators why certain areas are more prone to tech companies' investments than others. Those countries which do have landings of submarine cables, for example, will always be part of the tech diplomacy ecosystem of negotiations, as well as the countries which do have climates that allow for major data centers that have less environmental impacts, so they need less cooling and less energy. We have seen also certain areas, specifically in India, that where the local, not only national, but local policies and regulations have provided a very strong stimulant for the companies to be there. We have, for example, Luxembourg and Dubai that have tax benefits, as well as Ireland, of course, for the tech companies to settle there. So there will be also there. And we have looked at some of these interactions. So I would invite everyone, when you see the map of tech diplomacy hubs, and we also in the report have a detailed table of what happens, which company does what in which of these cities, is also to think globally about it. For example, why does Google acquire carbon dioxide offsets in Brazil, but in Singapore they promote environmental sustainability, and how that interacts between each other. So I will invite you all to download the report. I think my colleague Nina already has posted the link to the report in the chat. And I do see we have 20 chat messages. So I would suggest, we have about 15 minutes left. We will dive into these questions that we have on chat, or if there are any in the room, please go ahead and ask.
Now, just Pavlina, you mentioned the cables. The cables are very important part of geopolitics. We'll discuss it. We were mentioning in chat International Forum on Diplomatic Training. Directors of diplomatic academies will meet next week in Montenegro, and we will discuss these issues. But this is an important part of geopolitics, where you have all our communication. If some colleagues are following now this call in India, or in China, or in Singapore, probably the packets which are carrying my image, or Pavlina's, are going through this from Alexandria to Suez, through Red Sea and other places. And while internet is based on Wi-Fi, it has a really clear cable structure with more or less the same points that existed a long time ago with British Empire and telegraph cables, and they remain the same points in the digital era, geostrategical points, including we saw it Cairo, including Miami. Most of the cables coming in the Euro are coming via Miami. Therefore, that's an interesting. We have this European cable structure. Therefore, I invite you. You can take the link and you can see how your country is connected to the internet. We ask always our diplomats who attend our courses, like they should know the ports, rivers, roads, airports. They should know what are the cables that connect them, especially when countries have one or two cables, like many African countries. Here is United Arab Emirates, quite well connected, but you can see how your respective countries are. India is well connected, you see, but we have countries in West Africa which depend on one cable, like Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, and on Mauritania. What does it mean? If that cable is cut, that countries won't have anything, won't have WhatsApp, won't have emergency services. There's just one element which is not directly related to tech companies, but it is important part of geopolitics. Okay,
we do have a lot of questions.
We'll go through questions. Would you like, Pavlina, or should I read?
I don't know. Let's start with Yannick. Hello, Yannick. Nice to see you again. So the question is, if you were a developing country with limited resource, how would you go about tech diplomacy? What would be the one thing, right? I would say it is quite obvious from the map we have shared that there's areas where there are no red dots or any kind of big tech diplomacy hubs, specifically in Africa and Latin America and Central America. So for those countries, I would say it is internally very important to have the capacity to identify what they want to address, what they need to address on a national level, and then understand which companies may have what they need, may have the technology or the access to data or research and development that country would mostly benefit from. But Jovan, I'll let you also chime in on this one because it's a big issue with tech diplomacy.
Sure. I wouldn't go by all means to have, let's say, representation in Silicon Valley. That is not proportional for some small countries. They have to establish priorities. They have to use AI. We had this morning session, and AI provides small countries with possibility to have level playing field in the diplomacy in general, because they can follow. You saw our UNGA analysis. Big countries do not have any more big advantage, because with AI you can have reporting on your priorities. I would definitely be very strategic involvement in cables. Let's say Mauritania should have at least second cable, not one cable. Should focus on the very concrete issues, not bringing next billion, but bottom billion. Most of these countries have a big poverty issues and people who are completely excluded from normal and digital world. To use a common sense, but definitely I wouldn't invest time and money, limited time and money, into representation in Silicon Valley. That would be, maybe African Union as a whole should have it, like European Union has. Switzerland has an interesting representation in Silicon Valley, in San Francisco, more on science side, Swiss next. That would be my answer. Definitely, as Pavlina said, focus on priority issues, and that's it. And then see who can help, what companies. Helena Krugovic asked the question to Dr. Hemery. I don't know, John, you may answer, but I don't know. Given the increasing flow of digital, what strategy do you recommend for diplomats to enhance the digital presence? Okay. With the rise of disinformation propaganda, what are the most effective methods for diplomats to counter these threats? How can international cooperation be strengthened to address this issue? Looking ahead, what emerging technologies do you believe will have the most significant impact on diplomats? How should diplomats training program adapt to prepare? John, you can answer the question. You are always well-informed and an excellent speaker. Just unmute yourself and tell us what would be your take on it. And Helen apparently knows you well, and it's good. I love when we have interaction among audience.
Yes, well, Jovan and your colleagues, thank you so much for providing this opportunity for discussion. I wouldn't dream of intervening and taking the lead on this discussion, particularly in the first question addressed directly to me. What strategies for diplomats to enhance their digital presence? Every diplomatic service with which my colleagues work are confronting the same question. What do we do? And it's Diplo that leads, I think, on helping people to understand how quickly this context is changing, how the playing field is changing. So this is going to evolve as a discussion, and we're looking forward to the International Forum on Diplomatic Training next week, when a lot of people from diplomatic academies will share their confusion with each other.
Thank you, John. That's great to see you. We haven't seen each other for a really, really long time.
Too long.
Excited that we see each other in Montenegro. Gange Shvarma, is there an exploration on the engagement with regional versus bilateral versus national engagement by tech companies? Any thought on how one might influence the other? Okay, Gangesh, what we can see in Europe, I think is the best case study, is that companies are trying to go on all levels. They have presence in Brussels, obviously, but they're trying to find like-minded countries. For example, they had a very close relation with the Italian government, one of the Italian governments, around GDPR and lobbying on GDPR. Therefore, they have very close relation with Ireland, obviously, because most of companies are incorporated in Ireland. Complex relation with France, Germany, UK, especially on taxation. France and Germany are pushing, as you know, in OECD taxation, that taxes should be paid according to the number of users, where big tech companies and platforms are making money. And OECD is not getting yet there into the new taxation format. And in European Union, let's say Luxembourg, Malta, Czech Republic, and Ireland are against this reform, against this new type of taxation. Taxation will be more or less the following. If Meta, Facebook, Instagram has 30 million users in Germany, it should pay Germany taxes according to the number of users. The formula is more complex, but it boils down to this issue. Therefore, what we are noticing is that they're lobbying heavily on the countries that support their cause, their bottom line. And they're trying to play a bit of divide et impera by playing ones against other. They always find a champion in the region who is pro-business, and they're working on that actor. That's our sort of observation of the situation. To follow all the hub, does the Middle East have plans for representation in the Bay Area? I heard from, I think from Kuwait, from, if I'm correct, Emirates, from Oman. They were mentioning it, but I don't know if they establish some representation. Mind you, what we found, one shouldn't mystify this. Many countries have their general consulate in San Francisco, and you have one department dealing with Silicon Valley. I think Brazil has that, and quite a few countries. Pavlina will reflect more on that. Therefore, that could be also formula of representation in San Francisco. And in the publication, you will see how they act, how European Union has representation, how Switzerland and other actors. Vladimir Radunovic, in many cases, small countries of the same region and beyond have similar digital concerns with big tech, cybercrime evidence, content policy, AI bias. They should therefore join efforts to talk to big tech or AU, African Union mechanisms to talk to big tech. That's definitely, Vlada, our advice, because for very simple reason, they're too small to take on big tech. Only European Union can do, or African Union if they get together, because African Union has power to do it. Teresa Horeshova, Teresa, great to see you. And we miss you. Very exciting to listen to how the research on tech diplomacy has progressed, Diplo showing how it's done. Again, Teresa was one of the pioneers. She did the first study, and she was the key mover 7 years ago. And thanks, Teresa, for setting this on the track. And you can see that baby is growing nicely, and you shouldn't be worried about this. Alexandra Arns Gonzalez, I apologize, but I must leave. Sorry for not being able to continue. We are sorry, Alexandra, male, female, I don't know. Gangesh, thank you, Jovan, for the detailed response. Congratulations to the team, to this report and this presentation. Look forward to reading it, definitely. Pavlina, you can take over reading, but let me just sharing again the link to the book preview with the registration form. So when you sign up, you will receive a link to the full text. Michael Kende, great to see you, Michael. Michael, an obvious question from me, but how can Geneva increase its role as a hub, particularly for companies and civil society, or inversely, why is there this gap? Michael, what Pavlina shown is this 4 layers of interaction. Bottom line, indirect impact. Third was international negotiation. Fourth was societal impact. Obviously, Geneva doesn't, for most of these companies, Geneva does not impact bottom line. Maybe on tech standards, but maybe on WTO, but WTO is not in good shape these days. It impacts the second or even third layer. And probably they prioritize engagement. And what we notice, most of them are covering Geneva through what we call EasyJet diplomacy. EasyJet diplomacy is that you can be in 2 hours from most of European centers where they have presence, mainly Brussels and London. And Amazon is in Luxembourg. They can be in Geneva in 2 hours, come in the morning, have a meeting, and leave Geneva. I think that's basically their calculus, except Microsoft, which has the presence in Geneva, mainly for this, I would say, this broader agenda and security issues and their push for Geneva Digital Convention, Cyber Convention. That's it. Pavlina, over to you.
Yes, so to reflect, I wanted to reflect a little bit on the Ganesh question as well, because you addressed the question of why companies interact and why should you go to Silicon Valley and why should you not, that the countries do have different models and how they engage in tech diplomacy. Many of them do not have representation in Silicon Valley, and they rely on the conducting tech diplomacy within their capitals. So that is either strong countries that are involved in tech diplomacy, like India, Singapore, South Korea, or South Africa, or those that do not have the possibility to do so, but they also want to be engaged in tech diplomacy for their own national purposes. And that's, for example, the case of Nigeria or Rwanda and some African countries. So I would step away from the prerogative that you have to be in San Francisco to actually conduct tech diplomacy. It is way more dispersed area that we're working with, and the topics will be different as well. In San Francisco, you may have access to maybe closer decision makers. You may have access to a more global view of things. However, as we have seen with tech companies, one change in ownership and everybody worked with is gone the next day. So it is a very finicky area. A lot of countries do have, and Jovan mentioned this, a whole systems of representations. One of them is Swissnex, of course. They have set up their offices in different countries and regions that they think that are a priority for Switzerland. Another very good one is Brazil and their SecTech sections, which they call, of course, science and technology, but actually it's tech diplomacy. And if you speak Portuguese, they also have mapping of various areas they're interested in different geographical areas. So there's a lot of work done there. But just to complete the picture and kind of give the other side as well, it is not always the geographical area you were discussing, and rather than having your national priorities identified, having the strength of your country identified from the point of view of companies, and having that as your kind of ammunition as a diplomat to discuss things. Jovan, over to you. I think we're out of time almost.
Yeah, we will be on time representing Swissness in this respect. And what is important, we have one more comments from Michael, where he said, when I worked to the Federal Communication Commission in the US and lived in Washington, there were, of course, many companies represented, and it was always useful to get their perspective, not just in formal setting, but also in a workshop, in formal setting. And I feel that is missing here with regard to human rights, cybersecurity, trade, AI. Definitely, Michael, that's a problem. Michael refers to Geneva. He's based in Geneva. That is the case, and that would be better to have the, let's say, track 2 or track 3 diplomacy for signaling, for exploration of new ideas. And but I'm afraid we live at the time where this bottom line is becoming too powerful. There is less and less strategic thinking, not only in companies, but I would say in governments. And that's not favorable development comparing when you were 2 decades ago in FCC and having this feature. That's the reality. I think we had very good questions, an excellent audience. We have with us colleagues from all over the world. Thank you for coming. What would be our take on it? Please let us know about the publication. Publication is developed in the new format, and this would be my comment, of our Kaizen publishing. Kaizen publishing means that you have once a year or twice a year, humans doing write-up, summarizing, while publication is constantly updated throughout the year. The reason is very simple. I was invited 2 years ago to write on digital diplomacy for one publication, and it took 2 years to be published. And I said, whole world changed. It was even before ChatGPT and other things. Therefore, world is changing too fast, and traditional publishing doesn't work simply anymore, especially in such dynamic fields. And what we do at Diplo, we do following just-in-time developments, including reporting from UNGA and other places, but we also reflect on philosophical thinking. You can find on our website references to what would Rousseau or Voltaire or Kayutila or Confucius or Locke advise us about AI era. This is our approach, but this publication will be Kaizen-style publication. It follows the Japanese word of Kaizen, of continuous improvement on the text, on narratives, on data. We invite you to let us know your comments, suggestions, and to go together on this journey with a few tasks. One is to increase clarity in this field. Unfortunately, the field of digital diplomacy studies got really confused over the last 10 years, especially after this, let's say, movement of communication studies people in this field, which is great. They provide input on the public diplomacy, but diplomacy is much, much more than just public diplomacy. We have, that's one thing for the colleagues involved in training. Please include this question in training. Always look for the bottom-up issues and stay connected, stay tuned, and there will be more coming from Diplo on digital tech, cyber, whatever you call it, diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Well done, Jovan.
Thank you, John. See you.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
And Pavlina, of course.